All right, hello everyone. You're listening to Castbitten, a Dungeon Synth podcast, and I'm the host Trev. And I am so fortunate today to be joined by Evergreen. Evergreen is likely most popular for their project Fogweaver, but they're responsible for way more than that. I wasn't even aware of how much. They gave me a list. Let's see. It looks like we've got Hideous Gumphidius, Snowspire, Keys to Aneria, Draconic Regicide, Wandlim, and Delmac O, along with a handful of others. I did a little sleuthing and found out the others. There's Bull of Apis, Bull of Bronze, as well as one called Seed Spore, which is a project that really clicked with me personally. That one's just super nice and creative and pleasant to listen to. So yeah, a ton going on here. I'm so excited to have you on, Evergreen. Welcome onto the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Nice. So yeah, like I mentioned, I didn't realize just how many projects you had cooking. Do you feel like Fogweaver is your main focus, or do you like to consider them all, I don't know, equals or all your children or something like that to yourself?
Yeah, it's hard because like in some ways I don't like to think of any project as like the main project and any others as like a side project, but there's inevitably like, the one thing that you always come back to. I
That's
feel like
interesting.
I feel like Fogweaver, at least the last few years, has sort of been that in a way, kind of been home base for me.
Home base is a great way to put it, I think. That's really interesting. When you're making new stuff, do you set out for, whatever your next release is? Do you set out at the beginning for it to be part of an established project, or part of something new, or do you kind of discover that along the way and see which one of these things you have cooking that it might fall into?
Oh yeah. Hmm. I I definitely take both approaches.
Okay.
There's definitely moments where I sit down and I know going in um what I'm going for, and a lot of times that has to do with like one of the differences, but not always, between some of my projects is just like the stuff that I use to make it. So so I usually know if I'm sitting down with my Casio or
Right,
Yamaha
right.
keyboard or something. I'm like, okay, this is going to be Fogweaver, but that's also not always been the case. There have been times where I've like been playing that and realized, oh wait, I actually really like this for Hideous Gomphidius or something. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of both.
Yeah, that's nice. Kind of flows. To me, they all have their own distinct identities, which is cool. It's difficult to do that, especially over multiple releases for a project to keep that identity there. So I can see how what you're saying would happen. Especially you mentioned using different tools for them. Distinctly, some of them you seem to record straight to tape, whereas others, I imagine they're digital. They're on some sort of workstation. Um,
Yeah,
I imagine that that's a big deciding factor, since that seems to play a consistent role.
yeah, totally. Like, yeah, with my project Wandlim, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, I used a keyboard that I use for a lot of Fogweaver stuff, and really the biggest difference is that I only recorded one track and used like a really terrible cassette recorder for it. Um, but yeah, so sometimes it can be like musical gear or the stuff that I record on that
Okay.
differentiates it.
I know. It seems like you have a pretty big range of what might influence and inspire. Does that kind of direct what project you're working on too? I know some of the projects seem specifically dedicated to certain genres or sources of literature or something.
Oh yeah, yeah, like Fogweaver is very specifically my project based on the Earthsea books. Uh, and so, and I have a few others that are have
Right.
kind of some more direct influences like that I go in like with the intention of writing something for an atmosphere already in my head. Yeah.
Okay, that adds up. I can see that. Wanlim, I imagine that's maybe more Tolkien inspired. Something like Del Maco, which was super cool to me. Doing a little googling online, it seems like that title is based after a novel by Philip K. Dick, who's an author that I'm super into as well.
Oh, that's
I can see
awesome.
how that influences because that one, like you said, that's more a sci-fi angle on Dungeon Synth, and so I can see. I don't know if you'd been reading some Philip K. Dick or something that might be what pops out for you.
Yeah. Well, firstly, I need to congratulate you. I think you're the first person to make the connection specifically with Wan Lim. That's the name of
Oh,
an
nice.
Entwive.
Yeah, yeah. That's so exciting.
Yeah, nobody else is. I don't think anybody else has picked up on that, or at least not said anything about it. So,
uh,
um, but yeah, Philip K. Dick. That was kind of the initial intention with the beginning of Delmaco, and that's kind of like the nature of some of these projects is they'll change. But with the first album for that, I specifically was really going after kind of that like pulp sci-fi Philip K. Dick feel.
yeah,
In the last two, I've actually gotten away from that and started taking to like writing my own stories that
right.
kind of accompany the music.
Yeah, that's something I have in my notes. If you don't mind diving into that a little more. So it seems like all of your releases will have at least a small little write up on the Bandcamp page. But then some projects like this Delmac O one that you mentioned, the full accompanying short stories. I think another one, your Draconic Regicide, that seemed to have a little more than just a small write up with it. I always really like that. I like having context with music, especially with instrumental music.
Yeah.
Have you always had other creative works like writing that you've tried to kind of pair together with your music, or is this something that you're, I don't know, kind of moving towards? I guess.
Um I guess I always have I've always been very like into writing stories, very into coming up with stories in my head or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
for a long time it was just like, okay, I have this story in my head, I'm just going to write the music. And as best as I can translate this story or the feeling that I'm kind of getting with that story into music. And really, in the last few years, I've grown a little bit more confident in like just putting my writing out there. Because the biggest thing is, I've never really felt as worried or, I guess, not confident with my music. Or at least I'm willing to accept the imperfections as far as that goes. Whereas with my writing, it's really hard for me to not like just proofread myself into oblivion, I guess. I'm just
Right.
sort of like, oh, I don't know. I just don't always love my writing. So yeah, that's kind of been the move in the last like few years with a couple of the projects, just trying to incorporate some of that. Because I'm with you. I really love like when I discover a project that has just a full story that you can follow along with, and
Right.
really pairs with the music. And I love bringing the other mediums kind of into the musical world in that way.
Yeah, it can be really stimulating to bring kind of two concepts together, like the writing and the music. And I totally see where you're coming from. I feel the same way. I know some artistic endeavors feel a lot more natural to just throw it out there. Something like writing just feels like totally naked, so scary to put out, I think.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is like it's so much easier to kind of hide behind the ambiguity of especially like instrumental music.
Right.
And sort of I don't know, with some projects I definitely like to embrace that and kind of keep it vague, because there's also, some beauty in finding your own like meaning within a work that you're engaging with. But um with writing, it's so much more direct, and you can't, there's only so much that you can like read into it, especially if it's not intended to be like really poetic or anything. It's
I
just kind of
see.
what the
Yeah.
words say.
Yeah. Well, for what it's worth, I think that your writing matches your music. Especially, I like the heavy, hard hitting sci-fi. So reading your most recent Delmic album, the way that you wrote it through field logs, the way they're communicating, I thought it all turned out really cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I see where you're coming from. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of thinking about, you've got all these different types of albums with different sounds on them. We got into like big picture how you're like selecting the instruments, or what kind of feel could be on it. How about like writing the melodies and the harmonies and things like that? I guess first off, are you formally trained? Do you have a deep music background? I know from looking at like Bull of Apis, for example, you seem to have some experience playing traditional instruments like guitar and bass and percussion. Um, I don't know. Can you just kind of give a little rundown about your experience with music in the past? How you got to where you are?
Yeah. So yeah, so I my background is I was trained to play guitar. And I played in a few bands growing up, but mostly, I don't know, I guess I always kind of like goofed around with electronic kind of music on my computer. Um, and that was sort of like ambient music in particular has always been something that I've come back to for a long time.
Interesting.
And so yeah, that's kind of where like I don't know. I played guitar, but I would mess around more with like ambient music and that kind of stuff. So then just about, well, I guess it was 10 years ago, I started what was a project of mine, like a what I would have considered like my main project for a long time was called Evergreen Refuge, um, which is like ambient, folky stuff with some like black metal kind of things mixed
Okay.
in. But mostly, very guitar focused and guitar forward.
Okay,
So
I can
yeah,
see that.
yeah. So I had a little bit of like musical education with just learning guitar, and um, but I'm not like classically trained or anything like that. I
Right,
know my way
right.
around it enough, but
Yeah,
yeah.
and guitar kind of helps you get a good head for the rest of it when you get into things with keys or computer software and things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What about theory? Do you have any relationship with music theory, or are you kind of following your ear for a lot of this?
Yeah, I part of my education with guitar. Well, what's actually interesting about it is my guitar teacher for a long time, when I was a teenager, was actually blind. Um,
Whoa.
yeah, so I our lessons always centered around just listening. He did teach me theory in that I learned scales, I learned why things work well together, and kind of just
Right.
general theory outline stuff, but never learned like I never learned it in like a writing or notational way, I guess, if that makes sense. And
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I definitely have like I have some knowledge of theory, enough to like know what I'm doing when I'm sitting down at a keyboard and kind of messing around with a I don't know, messing around with a key or whatever. Um, but I'm not like super well versed in theory or anything like that.
For
Yeah.
sure. It's just that's always something that I'm curious about. Because you certainly don't need to know any theory to make, I mean, any type of music, but especially Dungeon Synth. I feel like you can really follow your ear there, but if you have the theory background, I don't know, that changes the context of it. And I don't know, I'm always trying to guess when I listen, like, oh, what's their background? What is it like? And it's always
Yeah.
interesting to hear how it turns out.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of interesting, like, I was talking to a friend about this not too long ago about how, so many of us have kind of an ear that is tuned to years and years of Western music. And
Right.
so most people really actually have a lot deeper of an understanding, or at least an ear for like theory or like what sounds good than we really want to like admit, and I try to tell people that when I've had a few friends who are like, oh, I want to start making Dungeon Synth, or I want to start making something, but I don't really know how to do this stuff. And I'm always like, just trust your ear, just try it. And I think I think most people will find that they'll be able to hear out what sounds good, or honestly, you might find something outside of even the theory world that sounds good to you, and that's awesome too. So
Ah, that's so nice to hear. I really love that. I totally agree, especially with everything that computers have to offer for making music. It's easier to kind of not worry too much about making certain mistakes, and just follow what sounds natural and get something. And if it's kind of funky, it sounds kind of funky. And that's cool too.
yeah,
So
sometimes that's kind of one of the cool things about Dungeon
yeah,
Synth is
yeah.
the imperfection can be the beauty of it in a lot of it.
So when did things like you mentioned, you use your Casio on a lot of Fogweaver. Um, when did keys kind of come into the mix? If you're starting guitar, you're taking guitar lessons. Was it gradual, or was there a point where you say, I want to make key instrument music. I want to make something with synthesizers, with Casios. What's the story there?
Hmm. I I throughout doing my more like guitar focused music, I had a couple things here and there that were much more like synthesizer focused, um, much more like ambient than
Mm-hmm.
anything. Um, and then let's see, I guess I sort of always messed around with that stuff. And then I think the biggest focus that really set me on the path was working on the first Del Maco album.
Oh,
I
really?
Yeah, and I like well, part of it was I was having some like technical difficulties with some of my like computer and my
Mm-hmm.
software and stuff. So I was like, I don't know. I ended up getting this cassette 4 track and just playing around with running my synthesizer into that, and that's sort of what came out of that. And ever since then, I was just, I don't know. I guess I sort of that sort of ignited a little bit in me that was attracted more to synthesizer music, especially. Um, and yeah, I guess it would have started there, and that sort of um, started my path into focusing a little bit more on synths,
Yeah.
and then discovering Dungeon Synth later on was sort of the what made me even think outside of just a synth, and
Right.
incorporating just some regular kind of keyboards or whatever in there. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I feel like when people consider playing a new instrument, they think of how it sounds. Uh, and oh, I like the way this sounds. I want to learn it. But in practical use, once you start doing it, a lot of it's about how comfortable and usable it feels. And it seems like you were able to plug in, the synthesizer into the 4 track, and that workflow kind of hooks you. I think that I noticed that a lot with synthesizers and especially with MIDI on computers that a lot of times it's not even the sound that draws people in. It's a new way to work on music that I don't know kind of hooks them.
Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned kind of making this ambient synthy music, and then later on getting into Dungeon Synth. Um, how did that happen? Were you just kind of going down the pipeline of ambient and stumbled on it, or was there a person that got you into it, or maybe a group that kind of led you into it?
Yeah, well, I guess I was aware of Dungeon Synth for a while
Mm-hmm.
cuz I've been kind of um on the outside, I guess, of being into like black metal. Like I've always liked black metal. I've always liked ambient music. And so I was aware of some of the like what people consider a lot of the like classic dungeon synth artists at this
Okay.
point. Um, I was aware of them for a long time, and I kind of like wasn't always into it just because my like I said, my background just being a little bit more into ambient music. I kind of approached it from that direction and was like, oh, yeah, I mean, it's not really ambient music. It's not always really ambient music, I guess I should
Right.
say.
Yeah.
Um, and so it didn't pique my interest as much, but I was also, into my whole life I've always been into like fantasy literature, fantasy movies, fantasy games. I've always loved that kind of stuff, um and I think what really ignited it for me was I have this friend Ross who is behind the project Malfet, and he and I ended up doing like a music trade because
Oh.
he runs a little label called Pacific Threnodies,
Okay.
um, and so I knew him through metal and kind of a whole different community outside of Dungeon Synth, and I ended up getting one of his CDs, a Malfet CD, and listened to that, and it just totally matched what I was feeling at that time. And that's always a hard thing to express, but yeah, I guess it was receiving that CD and like being in the particular like headspace that I was in at that time.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it just clicked, and um yeah, I think that was really the moment that it all um yeah, it just really clicked with me.
Oh, that's really nice. Having a kind of a personal introduction, especially. I think that helps stuff like that stick.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's interesting. You mentioned your friend there and swapping songs and things. I've noticed, especially with Fogweaver, it seems like you do a lot of collaboration. A lot of like splits and shared releases and things like that. Is that something? Do you feel like you work really well when that happens? Something like Vidernin, I believe that you did half of that, and then another artist did the other half of the CD. And of course, Kingdom of Fog was a three-way split. I don't know how does that make you feel about music as you're going into it? Is it any different? Are you thinking any different?
Yeah, so the I did the split with Aerith Akbe, which is the Imminent Grove. Um,
Okay.
that one, yeah, I became aware of his project because he also makes music based on Earthsea. Um, and so
Ah, that's the
that was
connection.
kind of
That
like
makes sense. Yeah.
yeah. And so I sent him an email and was like, okay, well, we have to do this because like, there are only a handful of people making Dungeon Synth specifically based on Earthsea.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, that one kind of um, set us on that path. I actually didn't really like. I don't really like dislike splits. I do. I really like splits, but am not always super keen on doing them myself.
Hmm.
And it's more just because I don't know. I guess I like to really just like know the people that are behind the projects before I agree to do splits with them.
I get that.
But
Yeah.
there have been a couple of times like the with Arathok Bay and the In the Kingdom of Fog split came about just because we're like, hey, we all have fog in our name. Let's just like make a fog split.
I was excited to ask about that. If could it really be as simple as you all have fog in your name? I'm so happy to hear that it is.
Yeah,
That's
and
really
actually
funny.
the that really came about because uh last year um both Foglord and I were slated to play Northeast Dungeon Siege, which we did do, but they had planned Northeast Dungeon Siege to be an in-person event um, early 2020, and
Hmm.
of course that couldn't happen. So
Right.
they had an online one. But the funny thing about it was Foglord and I were both supposed to play it, and we were supposed to play the same night. Um,
Oh, no way.
yeah, and I forget how it worked out. He might have played after me. I can't remember, but I think after that he messaged me and was like, "Yeah, we should
Gotta
do
make
this
something
fog split."
happen.
Yeah.
Man, I'm glad you brought up Dungeon Siege because I was doing a little looking around online and ran into that. I know that this one got, I guess you could say, rearranged or changed, but it seems like maybe there were some other in-person Dungeon Siege events or some concerts that I saw that your project name was tied to it, but I couldn't find any videos or anything like that. Um, yeah, have you ever been to any of those in person that have actually gotten the chance to go on?
Yeah. So there was Northeast Dungeon Siege that happened in 2019, which was not the first one. I want to say there were one or two others um, before that, but it actually was that whole thing really started with like a pretty small group of friends.
Hmm.
I think the first one was just like a handful of people that were, we're they were like, oh, we're all in the same region. We may as well have a little show together.
Right. That's
Um,
nice.
yeah, and then that kind of grew into like a full on festival. I didn't go to the Northeast Dungeon Siege in 2019. However, I did because of that. There was an offshoot called Dungeon Siege West. Um,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
yeah, in 2019 as well. That happened in Seattle. And so I actually got to play that as Fogweaver. So I went out to that and played it. And yeah, it was a great time.
Can you walk us through what that's like? What playing a live Dungeon Synth set is like, and what the Fogweaver atmosphere
Yeah.
what's going on with that? I imagine the crowd's super excited to be there. It's such a niche thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so many weird logistical issues to go about tackling to get Dungeon Synth live. What does that look like for you?
Yeah. It was, so let's see, where do I even start there? Um, yeah, like I said, the Dungeon Siege West was an offshoot by my friend who's behind Guild of Lore, a fantastic project. And he decided to set it up in Seattle. He actually didn't even doesn't even live in Seattle, but there were some other people involved, and I think that for whatever reason it ended up there. And but yeah, it was a really interesting time because prior to that, I my only experience with Dungeon Synth was, very solitary
Right.
experience and
Yeah.
listening to tapes by myself. And um, I didn't watch any of the stream of Northeast Dungeon Siege in 2019, but I did. I watched videos after the fact
Hmm.
that came out, and I was very fascinated by how such a solitary and introspective kind of genre can be like translated into a live experience. And so I didn't really know what to expect when I went into Dungeon Siege West. Um, I just had no idea what
Right.
it was going to be like experiencing any of this, but it was great. I mean, it was there were, I can't remember how many acts, but most of the audience that was there were people that were also artists or like ran a
Interesting.
label or
Yeah.
yeah, and so it was just like it was like meeting all these people that we all like knew each other online, and we're all meeting for the first time and all very overwhelmed, but having a great time. And yeah, there were some really wild projects for Dungeon Siege West that kind of brought this music into a very like immersive kind of atmosphere. Like,
Hmm.
well, like I mentioned, Guild of Lore, he actually played there and put on a whole performance where he had um like people holding candles and had
Wow, no way.
yeah, and he like was doing like spoken word bits, kind of all like telling a story throughout the
Yeah.
whole performance. And yeah, there were there were some really cool um just very cool performances. And um yeah, like I said, I think just experiencing what was otherwise such a an introspective thing as a live thing with other people in itself is weird, but weird and new. But there were also some really neat things that came out of it, and it's also new for everybody to be performing this stuff. So seeing how people like the ideas people have to go about that was really
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah, that really flips it on its head, like you said. That was something I hadn't thought of, but it really is such an individual thing in general. So to bring them all together is super interesting, and with so many of them being part of the scene as, like you said, as musicians and labels, I can see it being as much of a meetup or an event as it is a live concert, and there's a lot of fun to imagine with that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
I appreciate it. Seems like dungeon synth artists are really able to commit to it. I've browsed the Northeast Dungeon Siege, like their photo gallery, and it's serious. They get so dressed up. There's all the smoke and lights, and just seems like such a fun, whole hog kind of time. Yeah, it's really selling me on it.
Yeah, yeah, there was gosh, there were, I'm like struggling to remember all of it, but there were so many really wild things that people did. There was I don't know, are you familiar with the um Project Pumpkin Witch?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay, so Pumpkin Witch is a trio of mysterious individuals.
Okay.
And they put on such a wild performance. Like one of the members actually carved a whole jack-o'-lantern like on stage while they were playing.
Oh
And
my gosh.
oh, it's just so cool. Like, yeah, really bringing in audience participation, immersion, storytelling, all this stuff that really is like, I think something that's special about this genre in particular. Because
Yeah.
that's that kind of stuff doesn't like, I've been in other communities and seen people try to do some more out there things, and that doesn't always fly. Some people would dismiss that kind of stuff sometimes as being cheesy, but
Right.
I love that about Dungeon Synth. I love that people just kind of go for it and um put their whole heart into it. And yeah, it's a really special thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's really nice to hear that. I think that's a special thing about the scene is people do tend to just full on commit and lean in as much as they can. And like you said, I'm glad that it's welcome in the scene. I'm glad that it's met with success.
Yeah, definitely.
So when you're playing that show, as Fogweaver, are you playing like the melodies, or the key parts, anything like that? Are you playing that live, or do you have the mixes from your album and you're kind of activating things at different times? Is it a unique set just for the live performance?
Right.
What's going
Yeah.
on there?
Yeah, so that for me, I it took me a while to try to figure out exactly how I wanted to do Fogweaver live. And I kind of came to the conclusion for my own project that I guess I sort of didn't want to compromise the songs that I had written, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
want to do something entirely new, and I didn't really want to do them differently. So um I usually would just break it down, have a track that's playing a lot of it, and play a couple other parts through the song. And um the few times that I've played, I've done that and tried to focus a little bit more on the atmosphere of what I want the live experience to be like. So I every performance I've done with Fogweaver, I've incorporated some more performative kind of things into that.
Okay.
Because I guess I just always thought like, well, to me, a big part of what you or what one should think about when they're considering how they want their performance to be is really just the like, what do you want your audience to get out of that? And to me, it's like I always felt like wouldn't be that. I don't feel like people would get as much out of me just standing up there and playing a keyboard. Um,
Right.
and that's not to knock on anybody who does that, because I have seen
For
some
sure.
amazing artists do like a keyboard and a loop pedal and put on like the most incredible performance. But for me, I didn't feel like that was right for Fogweaver. So yeah, I usually try to just incorporate that performance or the atmosphere that I'm hoping to get from playing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree. I've seen that done in ways that are really interesting with the one person and a loop and some crazy synths. But like you, I like the showmanship, and I like the idea. If it's a Dungeon Synth concert, I don't know, people are there to have a good time, and they don't necessarily need to see like top tier musicianship the whole time as much as they want to see a good show put on. And I like the
Yeah,
theatrics. I think that's fun. So I like where
I
you're
do
coming from
too.
there.
Yeah, and it's I think that that kind of connects back to what I was saying, and that like it's a relatively new genre, or at least the revival of Dungeon Synth is relatively
Mm-hmm.
new, and so we don't have a long history of performances to draw upon, or like anything like that. There's no blueprint for how to do this stuff, which is kind of the beauty of it. And
Yeah.
um, I've seen even artists that just have entirely a backing track and do a whole performance with it, and that can be incredible. And it's another one of those places where I think like, yeah, this kind of stuff is something that is incredibly special about Dungeon Synth, and um, that all of that kind of stuff can be welcome. And people really, in my experience of both the online Dungeon Siege streams and the in-person Dungeon Siege West, people really, really get into it, no matter what it is. People just love it, and you know they're very passionate about this
Yeah,
music, which is cool.
absolutely. Yeah, that is really cool. If we can pivot, I you said something earlier and I kind of put a pin into it and I'd love to come back to it.
Mhm.
Um, so you mentioned, I guess we've established you have a lot of fantasy literature and even this like pulp sci-fi literature that you pull from, but you mentioned being into a ton of sources of fantasy. It sounds like everything from books, movies, video games, music. Maybe we could go into a little more detail there and say what some of your bigger influences across the board, musical, non-musical. I don't know, whatever you're thinking, whatever inspires you. If we could dive into that.
Yeah. Um, let's see. I mean, I like like I've said with Fogweaver is based on the Earthsea books, which
Right.
Earthsea is a huge inspiration for me. The author Ursula K. Le Guin is a huge inspiration for me. She wrote a lot of sci-fi too. Um,
What about
and then
Earthsea do you feel like draws you in? Because like you said, you don't hear that as often, not as often as something like Tolkien.
yeah,
It's a little
uh,
more niche. It's nice to hear it's something a little outside that's such a big influence on you.
yeah. I think that a big part of what I when I like try to sell people on Earthsea, um,
Yeah, sell me. I basically didn't know about it until I was prepping for the interview. Give me your
oh, okay,
elevator pitch.
yeah. So I think the beauty of Earthsea is that it, especially the first three books, really presents itself as, and really is, like this young adult kind of classic coming of age
Hmm.
story in three parts. And um, each of the first three books all kind of have these really heavy themes that actually, like, upon reading them as an adult, like really really resonate with me. And um things from like without spoiling anything,
Right.
just themes about like having responsibility and having pressures of being something you don't want to be, or um arrogance, or hubris, things like that, that are
Hmm.
very very adult themes. And the rest of the books also have that, but the first three in particular have this really intense, like, they're like, okay, here's a fantasy story about a wizard that goes off to wizarding school, which,
Right.
yeah. um so you go in and you're like, oh, it's a cute little fantasy story, but then it has these themes that just like really deeply connect with
Huh.
the world that we're in now. And that's something I really love about Ursula K. Le Guin's writing in general. um her her perspective seemed to always be that she was writing fantasy and sci-fi, so why not try to like imagine other possibilities, or try to um, make us think differently about the world that we're in, but through the lens of this other world. Um, and I think that that was a big part of it for me.
Yeah, I can totally see that. That's really interesting. It's nice to have like a really consistent source to draw from for a project.
Yeah,
Yeah, something to come back to. Um
yeah, definitely.
yeah, are anything that you feel like is like a major pillar of the Evergreen influence and inspiration? Um or is it Earthsea Tolkien? Are those kind of the strongest points?
As far as like fantasy literature, yeah, I really love Earthsea, Tolkien. I also like, hmm.
Maybe I'm putting you on the spot a little, trying to rack through your memory. I know that's tough.
Oh no, that's all right. I was sitting here actually looking at my I'm kind of staring across the room at my bookshelf. And
Oh, there we go.
yeah, and I guess not so much fantasy, but a huge inspiration, that, or something I do come back to a lot, is the Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind manga. um,
Okay, I'm not familiar.
yeah, so it was written by Miyazaki, who everybody knows from,
Okay, I am familiar with that.
yeah, Spirited Away, and he did a movie for Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. But he also wrote this whole graphic novel, and
Wow.
yeah, it's just like a beautiful, beautiful series. So that's definitely an inspiration, um, and probably outside of fantasy or literature, um, one of the I think the biggest inspiration on me most of the time is anything having to do with nature. Um,
Yeah.
so
That was
yeah, that's
something that I wanted to get into. It nature seems like at a little bit or in a major way a staple for all of your releases.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that sort of connects a little bit to what I love about Earthsea. More in the world of Earthsea, it's uh, there's a lot about that kind of connect back to themes having to do with nature, like the balance of the world, like all these very like
Mhm.
Taoist kind of themes throughout Earthsea that I really connect with. And yeah, I've like grown up in Colorado, as
Ton of
long as I can
nature
remember.
there, right?
Yeah, as long as I can remember, I was hanging out in the mountains and um, just have always been in awe of mountains and trees and rivers, and have had my own, I guess, connection to all of that. And yeah, just for
Yeah.
forever really. um
That's absolutely present as a listener experiencing your music. This kind of ties to the natural world.
yeah.
Um, yeah, maybe most clearly so in Seed Spore, which I mentioned was one that I really liked. That's straight up field recordings with music along with them. But even like I believe the first track after of Vidernin, right? That's got some sort of, I don't know if you made it with the synth or if it's actual recording, but some sort of wave sound coming in and out, and it just adds this like very naturey setting that
Hmm.
I don't know, at the beginning of the album really adds that framework to it.
Yeah, yeah, big uh themes of the ocean, and uh
Mhm.
yeah, that's definitely a huge inspiration for Fogweaver outside of Earthsea.
Okay, I've got maybe one more thing I want to dive into, one or two, before I'm running out of notes here. But something that I haven't touched on at all. One other thing that you mentioned, aside from all of these projects you're on, you are, in your own words, the Glade Keeper of Fable Glade Records. Can you talk a little bit about that? I,
Yeah.
I love that. That's wonderful. That name, Glade Keeper.
Yeah, I so let's see, Fable Glade.
In
um
particular, the seasonal releases. That's I maybe I'm just out of touch, but I've never seen that with the label, and I really appreciate that. I really think
oh
that's a
yeah.
neat idea.
Yeah, that was definitely like, so having a seasonal connection, or releasing things seasonally, has always been actually a part of projects I do in one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the project I mentioned before, Evergreen Refuge, um, very nature based, and I released albums like on equinoxes and solstices a lot.
Ah,
Um,
that's fun.
yeah, and kind of like really kept that connection and tried to keep it true to whatever the feeling of the music was. And that's something I've always been very connected to, is just the changing of seasons. And so at the beginning of last year, or really kind of at the end of 2019,
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking a lot about that, and thinking a lot about how how that, like having a label that released in seasonal batches and tried to curate a batch around the seasons was something I really wanted to see. And I kept thinking about it and kept thinking about it. And I've had experience releasing music for a while. Like I said, I released
Mm-hmm.
Evergreen Refuge stuff for 10 years. And so I was like, okay, I have this experience. Like I should just do this.
Just make it happen. That's a great
Yeah.
attitude.
Yeah, and through being a part of the Dungeon Synth community, I've really made a lot of friends and found, you know, people all over the world who are making beautiful music that I love. And like I really wanted to see um I wanted to see like cassette releases happen for these people. And um some of whom I know are not as able to do that themselves,
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. And so I was like, okay, like I want to make this happen. I love tapes. Like I'm a big tape collector. So I and so part of it was like, okay, I'm gonna think of some albums like I really wish were on tape. And so it kind of came together after that. And I, like right when I announced it, I pretty much had like half the year already full
I
of
was
of
thinking how far you
releases.
may have to plan ahead.
Yeah, it's always at least half a year.
Right.
Um, I usually start out the year with at least something for every season ready. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, it fills up pretty quickly, which
Yeah,
is
I can see that. About how big are the batches, if there's any consistency each season?
yeah. Um, so I started when I started the first batch. So I started Fable Glade at the beginning of 2020,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that I just got the ball rolling. But the first batch I released was the spring batch in March. And I had
Okay.
yeah, and I had 3 albums on that, um, by 3 different artists, and each of them had 50 tapes each. Uh, and then as I've kind of grown and gotten a little bit more interest in Fable Glade, I've gone up to, on average, like 5 albums a batch usually.
Wow.
Uh, there's a potential for an upcoming batch to have 6, but I haven't. I kind of try. I'm trying to keep it at 5 because that's kind of like the max. That's
I
that's
see that.
a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah.
A lot to manage.
Yeah, and now I'm doing runs of 100 tapes, so
Wow.
5 tapes all with 100 each. That it really adds up. So yeah, I'm trying to keep it more or less at that, but fitting all of these really amazing releases into the schedule can be hard and all of that. So but yeah, it's really fun. It's awesome. It's an awesome way to kind of work out some other skills, because there's the obvious stuff of like organizing and planning releases, and I do it all myself. So like I also do the layouts of cassettes for
Mm-hmm.
people, which I have all of them professionally duplicated, so I'm not like dubbing anything myself. But
It's still a lot of
um
work to get it set up.
yeah, right. And shipping it all, and like yeah, just all of the things that come with doing that stuff.
Yep.
But it's so rewarding. I mean, seeing there are like moments where the stress can be real, where like I'm not meeting a deadline that I want to meet or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then once I get those tapes in my hands, or once I get them to the artists and they're like all super proud to see their music in
Ah,
this like physical format, that is like that
that's
makes
what it's
all of
all
it so
about.
worth it.
That's
Yeah, and
nice.
yeah, and people in the Dungeon Synth community really do like. people really love cassettes overall, and
Absolutely, yeah. I love
and
it.
yeah, so there, I have a decent amount of people who just really love Fable Glade, and outside of Dungeon Synth, even I try to incorporate with Fable Glade some other music that I'm interested in, like
Yeah.
kind of like nature ambient stuff. I've had some folky releases too, um, and kind of all trying to keep within the seasonal feeling and a lot of the like naturey kind of stuff.
It's nice to hear that at the end of the day it's all worth it, because running a label just seems bonkers to me. Um,
Yeah.
Even the logistics of releasing like a digital full length, for me there were so many little just amounts of work that would add up, and with when you have physical releases, I'm sure that just exponentially increases it, and then multiple artists replications. uh,
Absolutely.
it seems
Yeah.
insane. So to hear that at the end of the day you're very proud and you're very happy, that makes me happy. That's nice to hear.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, I mean, I really love tapes, and it's, if anything, a lot of it is like so worth it just to me, cuz I'm like, this is a thing I love, and I got to like see it through and make it happen and make it the
Hmm.
way that I think that it should have been. Um and I there's definitely some like selfish beauty to doing it all,
It's
but
nice. It's good to be proud of something.
yeah.
Well, I think we're at an hour here. I feel like we've covered a ton of stuff. We might just let it go now.
Yep.
Yep, this has been such a pleasure. I'm so happy, so honored to have had you on. Uh, yeah, thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really happy that you're doing this podcast. I can't wait to listen to some of the other interviews.
Oh, nice. I appreciate you saying that. All right, well, yeah, take care. And to the listeners, I'll catch you next time. All right, friends, wasn't that lovely? We just spoke with Evergreen for quite a while, covering their many projects and how they make them, taking a peek into their inspirations and their wild musical background, as well as getting a deep dive, looking at things like what goes on at a live Dungeon Synth festival, and giving everyone a real rundown on the world of Earthsea. So yeah, I just couldn't be happier with how the last hour went. Be sure to check out Fogweaver at thefogweaver.bandcamp.com. You can also check out their Linktree, so linktr.ee/evergreenroots to get the complete Evergreen package and find out all about all of their wonderful endeavors that they've got going on. Yeah, a few things on my end before you go. Yesterday, I just released a new Castbitten single, and it's titled To Stare Down the Heavens, and you can find it anywhere that you listen to music. It's on streaming services, as well as my YouTube page and my Bandcamp. I've also created a Twitch account where I'll be recording and streaming and saving videos of Dungeon Synth production. So tomorrow, if you're listening now, so Saturday, September 18th at, I don't know, maybe like 2 p.m. Central Time, I'll be streaming a mixed breakdown of the new single, really picking it apart and showing everyone what I'm thinking when I'm recording music. And then I hope I'll make some music, hopefully with the help of some of the listeners. So that's going to be super fun, so maybe consider stopping by. The Twitch account is just Castbitten_. Castbitten with a little underscore at the end. And one last thing, I've also created this Instagram account for my Castbitten and my Castbitten projects. You can follow that at the same username, so just Castbitten_. Yeah, I'm not a huge social media guy, but I think it'll be fun. You can keep updated with all my work, all my stupid projects. And yeah, it's been nice so far. I've gotten a chance to talk and interact with some of you, and that's been really cool. It's been a lot of fun. Okay, yeah, that's really all I've got to say. If you're still listening at this point, then thanks so much for sticking around and for caring. And I'd like to just give one more huge thanks to Evergreen for coming on. That was really something great. I've already got more interviews scheduled, so just keep an eye out. All right, get out of here, everyone. Take care. See ya.